Hello and welcome to Jalopy and Friends, which is a podcast hosted by myself, Jalopy Jeff, or Jeff Sutton, and friends, or in this case, again, back-to-back episodes with just a friend, which is Jacob Rippey, or Ripstick on social media over here to my right. So today, I'm actually coming back from the 2025 Ford Performance Season launch, and so we thought it might be fitting not only to discuss that along with automotive news and some other aspects, but to also kind of focus on like what is the current modern supercar, hypercar sort of landscape and kind of what's going on at the top for the highest performing cars that are available, right? There's a lot of interesting stuff happening at the moment with the GTD, the ZR1, even some other manufacturers and stuff that all seem to be going to bat, and even people bringing up old cars and their records and what it means. So that's what we'll be talking about in this episode. But first, like always, we start with the news. So why don't you go first?
All right, so both Ford and Porsche came out this year and essentially told their investors that it's going to be a rough year for them, based on some of their less than ideal stock numbers recently and going into the future. They say they are hitting some headwinds for 2025, so this should be an interesting year. I'm a little bullish on Ford and Porsche, especially because they make really compelling products, especially for the enthusiasts. And some of that technology does kind of trickle down into some of their cheaper offerings, but they're both a little nervous for the future. I don't want to make it political, but especially if some of the tariffs become a thing, because they did
No, I think I
outsource
just
some of their
heard.
stuff. I know some of that got pushed back,
Yes.
but I know they did move forward with some of those tariffs on China. And I think since a lot of the automakers are fairly global, I think that'll be an interesting challenge to see how they fix that, whether they move some of their stuff back to America or whether they just raise their price on the consumers. Either or,
Well,
it's not
even
looking.
any sort of retaliatory tariffs from China
Yes.
back, right? Because isn't their whole thing like China's their kind of core market?
Yeah, Buick for GM, that's one of the reasons they kept the Buick brand is because they
Right.
were big in China, though they are losing market share quite rapidly because the Chinese are very proud of their own
Oh, they have
manufacturers
how
these
many
days.
manufacturers at this
Well, and
point?
they're
And
all
there's
they're all government pushed,
well, and some of
and
them are
funded.
tech companies, right?
Yes.
That up until 2 or 3 years ago were like, we're going to build a car.
Yes, and the government did subsidize a lot of their stuff, and so they're very proud of their domestic market, as are some Americans of theirs.
Mhm.
And so, but I know even Tesla's losing market share in China. Buick certainly has. Jeep is like not even a thing there anymore. And so Porsche is trying their best to kind of maintain their foothold, but even then, a lot of the Chinese are going to their own brands, especially since they're so heavily subsidized by the governments there. And so, but yeah, I'm sure there will be some retaliatory
Tariffs
tariffs.
from the other countries as
The
well.
other big brand that makes a lot of their stuff in China that sells in America is Volvo and Polestar.
Hmm.
And so I'm interested to see how that goes for them with these tariffs. Because I know that the tariffs, as of today, the tariffs in Mexico and Canada were pushed back
Right.
so that they can make a deal. But China is holding firm on theirs.
I'm glad that those are at least being able to be pushed back again. I always hate whenever I see friction with us and our neighbors, so to speak.
The
I
NAFTA
hate
countries.
that.
Well, and
Yeah.
people don't realize how many American or cars that are sold in America are made in Canada and Mexico.
Right, which, we could get into the specifics and the details of why they do that, but
Yes. So hopefully everything goes well for the automakers because I really want Ford and Porsche and all the other ones to succeed. So hopefully they do better than they're estimating.
yeah, well, there's some other things I think going on with that too, why they might have been skeptical of that. Obviously, the political landscape is out of their control, so they just have to roll with the punches on that one. But when you look at the lineup of the current vehicles for both of them have made really interesting and I think exciting announcements that are especially good for the long term. So I think Porsche announced that they're backing off of their hybrid push and electrification push, right? And so they're going to kind of double down on the combustion side.
Well,
of
and
things.
they're trying to make more hybrids because this is the year of the hybrid. Hybrids are selling out,
Right, but
and
for
so
some people, like
they
certain manufacturers, that's not what their customer base is looking for.
exactly.
Like
And
Mercedes
so
I just had one of Mercedes' new hybrids for 2025, and I was
yeah,
actually quite impressed. 54 miles of electric-only range.
oh, that's pretty good.
Most hybrids that I've tested that have any sort of electric-only range, it's like 17 miles, and then
The
even then,
plugins, yeah.
there's like caveats, like you can't go over 25 and stuff like that. And so it's like, oh, it's really only for leaving your neighborhood quiet in the mornings. But this is like usable range that you could, if you plugged it in every night, essentially actually drive to and from work every day on electric-only power.
Plug-in hybrids are great. E-revs are great, and I'm sure we'll see more of those. Even though there was only a couple for sale historically, I think the people who come out with the E-revs, which is going to be it's an EV that has a combustion powered generator, essentially that's not
i3
connected
was the
to the.
OG.
It was, and to a degree, the volts, though that is kind of contested because it could hook to the wheels too on that one. So that was kind of like a partial E-rev, and then of course, yeah, the i3 was kind of a famous one. So we'll see. I know that Ford. One of the things that Ford and Porsche both said is they're losing money on their EV
Of course, that's
development, and
pretty common.
so it's kind of a bummer because both of them make some of the more exciting EVs
Well,
that are.
The Mach E, right? The Mustang Mach E still outsold the Mustang GT.
Yeah, well, I mean, coupes in America are not friends anymore, or at least the American buyers. But and yes, I don't like that they named it the Mustang. I think they should have just called it the Mach E and gotten rid of the prancing horseback.
Yeah, I mean,
But
again, every period
I
review, right?
do like the new rally version with the white
Yes,
turbofan wheels and the rally suspension, and the Taycan. I can't pronounce the Porsche EV.
Taycan.
Taycan. The fact that they have you can get it within a wagon still with a
You can also
houndstooth
get the twin turbo
interior.
V8 version, the Panamera
You can't get that in a
Turismo.
wagon anymore.
Oh, really?
Mm-mm.
That was my favorite. You want to talk
Yes,
about like the cool, like understated wagon thing, although they're quite expensive.
they are.
But that was a cool package, the twin
Yes.
turbo V8.
But yeah, no. Hopefully they do a little better than they're looking for, thinking they're going to do, because a world without Ford or Porsche would be a much more boring world.
Yeah, it would be. I think the other thing is, I think Ford was one of the manufacturers that announced they're trying to create vehicles across the board under the that special $30,000 price point.
So yes,
So
so they have they have it's called their like Skunkworks team, and they're trying to develop a under $30,000 EV that would serve people well. Has a pretty good range for what it is. I'm interested to see how that goes, because sometimes Ford, when they work really hard on something, it doesn't quite pan out, and sometimes you get something like the Maverick where it's kind of a refreshing, opening in the market. I think an under
mhm.
$30,000 EV, that's not a freaking Nissan Leaf with 20 miles of range after 3 years.
Yeah, the Maverick surprises to me that Ford was the only one to really jump into that space. I think
Well, and Hyundai.
Dodge is now finally talking about getting into the mid size market,
Yeah,
right?
but not the compact.
But
Yeah.
like it took them so long, right? Like why are they? That seems like a
What
weird.
kills me though is they have a compact version called the Rampage that's sold in Brazil. And ironically, the taillights even show the American
It's a
flag.
that look when you look at the specs on paper, it looks a little underpowered for
It
the
looks
American
it looks
market.
fine, but the problem is they couldn't sell it here because any pickup truck that's not made in an NAFTA country gets a 25% tariff thanks to the chicken tax,
Mhm.
which I think was a Reagan, maybe a Nixon thing,
Something like that.
something like that. It was in the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, my American history is weak today.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll say Reagan. That sounds right.
Yeah, something like that. So speaking of tariffs, so yeah, hopefully Ford figures out their stuff. Hopefully Porsche does better. Hopefully everyone gets the PTS, because the fact that they offer any color you want and everyone still goes with black, white, and gray is kind of annoying. So get that PTS
I mean, some of
Porsche.
that is just how the
Buy yourself a
dealers order them,
Maverick.
right? The dealers know that they can order those colors and they'll be gone off the lot.
I mean, I guess the touch up's easy on something like that, but
Yeah, props to those of you who buy exciting colors,
yeah.
which exciting colors can mean a whole sorts of things. I really love a lot of the browns, metallic browns that have been
Wow,
coming out on cars.
browns.
I think they're great. Like imagine like you get the right like tan interior with like a brown exterior, maybe like black accents and stuff like that on a Porsche.
So you're 28 going on 60.
Yeah. Uh,
Sorry.
well, yeah. I am
Brown,
older in spirit.
every car guy wants what, that brown
It's
exterior,
got to be a
plaid
metallic
interior.
brown.
Yes,
Every gloss brown is terrible.
metallic brown, plaid interior wagon with a diesel and a manual. That is the car guy's
Yeah.
dream. So
Yeah, BMW had a pretty good brown for a while too.
yeah, and you could get it in diesel wagon without the manual though.
Most of the
So
German companies had browns. Actually, the new Espresso or whatever it is for the Corvette's pretty not bad. Although there's all the other colors are so good for the Corvette that
yeah,
I would get like Sebring orange, or I'd get
Riptide
yes, or
blue.
Riptide blue, which is
Riptide blue.
Grabber blue. I'd get one of those
No, that's a different
colors.
color. They have two blues.
No,
One's
no. Grabber
Riptide.
blue is the Ford blue. That's
Yeah,
like a similar
but
hue.
it's not Riptide blue. There's another blue color that matches the Grabber blue. The Riptide's more of a darker metallic-y.
I thought the Riptide blue is the only bright blue that they have, and the other one is something darker blue.
We'll put the answer on the screen if you're willing to look that up.
Probably not for the YouTube video.
Fair enough. Okay.
Nobody watches this on YouTube.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
All
okay.
right.
So you went to the Ford Performance shindig down in what was it, North Carolina?
Charlotte. Yeah.
Yes. How was that? Tell us all about that.
So it was a blast because in addition to the actual main event and stuff like that, they also put together like events throughout the day and other cool stuff. And so you get to hang out with a lot of Ford Performance drivers and do cool things like ride in the El Bandito Bronco with Lauren Healy driving, who then immediately had to fly out literally the next day after the event to go to King of Hammers. So that was pretty fun. Both him and Von Gittin were out and about. So get to talk to them and be like, oh yeah, I'm flying to California literally tomorrow. And it's like, cool, guess we'll party in Charlotte and talk about new announcements.
Side note on the King of the Hammers, my friends at Sherpa actually did finish for the first time King of the Hammers in their 4th Gen 4Runner that is heavily modified. So props to my friends at Sherpa. So
yeah, Ford did pretty well as well. I believe they won for the 4th year in a row the stock class using a Bronco. I don't know how they did the other stuff.
Super Duty doing so hot down King of the Hammers.
Yeah, not really. And I mean the Bronco, God, you can get almost anything you want, right? Anything that anybody would modify it anyways, you can get on one of the packages. You can get up to what, 37s?
37s on the Braptor.
Yeah.
And you could get
35s
on all the Sasquatches. You could get it with the factory snorkel with the Everglades edition and winch. You can get it with 1 locker, 2 lockers.
Little dry to need the snorkel for King of Hammers, but
yeah. So, and if you don't know what King of the Hammers is, I guess I would kind of describe it as like half Baja 1000, half rock crawling event, but
also kind of like hill climb, right? Because like the motorcycles, you watch them work their way up where they launch like 50 of them at a time, and then they're all fighting to go up a hill.
Basically, it's all these giant
Ultra
rock
fours,
gardens and then long distances between the rock gardens, and you have to essentially it's speed. So you're trying to go up as fast as you can.
It's what, Johnson Valley?
Something like that, yeah. And it's a pretty gnarly race. It's like America's Dakar, with less sand and more rocks.
Yeah, it's not really a Dakar because Dakar is kind of like a distance race, right? Whereas this is kind of more like the obstacles or like the hard part.
Yeah,
kind of going up the mountains.
It's rallycross mixed with rock crawling mixed with
yeah.
It's pretty intense and
also a big party.
Yeah, it's huge
in the dirt for all the people that go to hang out.
Mixed with what, Burning Man?
But whatever the automotive equivalent, the automotive equivalent of Burning Man is. Probably lots of beer though.
So yeah, they had those drivers out giving joyrides in the Bronco.
And then there was all sorts of other stuff. They had the electric truck going around giving rides, and then they had the new 800 horsepower supercharger Coyote package, the FP 800 package Mustangs ripping around and stuff like that.
Came out with a new supercharged Godzilla, right?
Yeah, so basically they did a bunch of announcements that day. This is one of the things that's changed a lot in automotive culture is a lot of manufacturers have basically started to do their announcements on their time. Like they'll host their own events to do announcements. And so Ford announced a ton of stuff. So 2 of which, there were 2 new crate motors. Mm-hmm. You had a supercharged Megazilla motor, which is the 7.3. And so that was...
Not for street use.
Yeah, this one's not for street use. And now I'm literally spacing the performance figures off the top of my head at the moment. I think it's 1,000 horsepower for that one, maybe.
It was a lot.
I think it's 1,000 horsepower. But then they also have a drop-in ready street legal supercharged Coyote motor.
Yeah.
That was like 775 horse or 800 horse, something like that.
It's more than adequate.
And that one's supposed to be drop-in
Mustang and.
Yeah, well, I think it's supposed to also be able to bolt into almost anything in the Ford lineup is the other thinking. Like even if you wanted to drop it into an existing Mustang, which they also sell the FP800 supercharger package as its own separate thing that comes with the Ford performance ECUs and all that type of stuff.
With a warranty.
Yeah, and they all come with warranties, which is also wild to think about.
I think I saw something silly like that Coyote. Comes with like a 3-year warranty on the supercharger and a 2-year warranty on the engine.
Yeah, that's the even some of these stage 3 manufacturers, right? Like so specialty vehicle engineering that build like the Yanko cars and stuff like that, they'll have like, oh hey, like the engine has like a 2-year 36,000 mile warranty, but then the rest of the car might have like a 3-year like generic warranty or something like that.
Ironic because it's normally the other way around where the engine's warranted for longer, but the rest of your car, like your bumper to bumper is 3 years and your engine's good for 5 year 60,000 miles. So I thought that was kind of a fun.
Yeah, they have to be careful with some of that, right? Because they do different stuff. I know that the Yanko stuff builds up the motors differently. I think Shelby's kind of the same way, 3-year, 36,000 mile warranties, stuff like that for a lot of their vehicles. And they sometimes, do change connecting rods and stuff like that for some of those. But anyways, getting back on focus, because it's Ford Performance, not only are they the performance like street vehicle side, but more importantly, they also do all the racing is considered under the Ford Performance Gauntlet.
So they did some NASCAR stuff, didn't they?
Like announcements
Yeah, NASCAR
or
announcements. Some cup cars. They have like a Mach E
yeah. So
future.
that's the it's what they announced was a new vehicle for the Ford Performance Racing Series, and it's a Mach E based sort of NASCAR EV prototype, and
Hmm.
it's based off I think they call it like Next EV or Next Gen EV, something like that. And NASCAR unveiled a prototype in 2024 that was like, hey, if we were to do an EV series, maybe this is what the cars would look like, type of thing. And so this is Ford's version of that. There is no EV series at the moment.
Sure.
But Ford also said that they're going to be taking it to Pikes Peak. So
Very
it
cool.
will also compete there, which I believe both the Super Van and Super Truck have both records at Pikes Peak that they've set with Ford performance stuff. So we'll have to see what this thing does as it goes up there.
Very
But
cool.
obviously, the main difference is being it's got Mach-E fascia.
Did I also see like a convertible NASCAR they came out with or something silly?
No, that was a random post I had. So we went to RFK Racing headquarters. We got to tour the
Oh, that's
facility,
what it
stuff like
was.
that. And
Okay.
in their museum, they had that car, which was from a commercial they did, where they literally
It was
chopped
half
off half
off.
the
Okay.
NASCAR to celebrate half off.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
Mixed up
funny.
your posts.
And it was actual cup car. I think
Yeah.
they gave rides to it too as like a promotional thing to people. So hilarious. It had 2 seats in it
Who
and
doesn't love the wind
convertible.
in their hair at 205 miles an hour on a banked oval?
Yes.
So,
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was hilarious in spirit. If they ever sold that, like that'd be
you
awesome to ride
probably, if
that
you had
around.
long hair, you'd look like Yzma when she goes down the tunnel where it's like straight back.
Yeah, I'm not sure you want to be in that way. Is it rigid enough to be able to like?
Yeah, you see the cowl shake.
Ew,
Things are
yeah.
about to happen.
Yeah. So they did that. Ford, I think, announced last year that they're going to go into Formula One, right? That's kind of been in the works. A lot of manufacturers have talked about it. Ford is slated to enter in 26, so we still have a little ways for that. But obviously, there's a lot of hype being built around. Christian Horner was actually there. I know I walked past him at least once or twice at the event. In addition to all the other Ford performance drivers and even Ford supporters, manufacturers, stuff like that, were also there. They had the number 65 car, which just won GTD Pro at the 24 Hours of Daytona. So that was nice, beating Battern there. Then the most important announcement, maybe to some people, is that Ford is entering LMDH. So that's going to be literally going for the all-out win in Le Mans in 2027.
So you're saying another Ford versus Ferrari movie?
Exactly, yeah, which I think was
And now
like the first
Cadillac's
hype.
actually going to Le Mans too, is what I saw, right?
Well, Cadillac's been competing
Or
in
no,
that class.
they're thinking Formula One too.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't they say like
I
Ferrari's
thought
going to build
I
their
thought
engines or something?
I thought maybe either GM as a whole or Cadillac tried to go into Formula One and they had established a partnership with somebody, but then I think later they realized that maybe the partnership wasn't exactly what they wanted because they wanted their own team and there was nobody necessarily giving them that, and so they only had like a partnership or powertrain supplier partnership, and they were like no, and so they kind
We're
of
going to make our own. Yeah.
backpedaled what that is. So that's I think the core of all of the major announcements. So a lot of really cool stuff. They had the T1 trucks and stuff like that there that do compete in Dakar and things like that. And there might have been T1s actually at King of the
I also
Hammers.
saw like a military vehicle from some of the photos. Like they had like some historic vehicles on display. I think I saw something from like Vietnam or something that was like Ford designed or Ford powered. I don't know. It was on the Autopian. It looked kind of cool. It looked a little out of place, but it was kind of funny.
There was this random I think they called it like a goat cart or something like that. And it was Korean. I don't think it's necessarily a Ford thing. I think that was just at the venue. Because I remember looking at that and reading the description. Yeah, I think it was whoever owns the venue had bought that and basically overseas and brought it back. And it was like some sort of like French US developed thing for use in Korea because they needed some sort of vehicle that was better suited to the terrains, which was also unreliable anyways. But this guy saw one and fell in love and brought it back or something.
I thought that was
So
kind
it was
of
in
a
a
funny
glass
thing that was on
box.
display.
Yeah.
And the Autopian did a whole article on that. And so
yeah, I believe it.
Jason Tortinsky.
Yeah, so that's kind of all the news. But as we work our way into the main topic, it's kind of relevant to some of that, right? So just somewhat recently still, the Ford GTD set a Nürburgring time in the kind of wet.
In the moist.
And so it was sub 7 minutes, which was what they were aiming for. So they technically achieved their goal.
And it made it the fastest American production car around the Nürburgring.
Yeah, and beat a lot of cars, including cars that were considered hypercars, right, as a high performance Mustang. So, they're obviously stoked about that, but they even announced that they plan on going back again
When it's dry.
to run it in drier conditions. So we may see a faster time from the GTD, and this sparked my interest in kind of looking at the modern landscape of what we're looking at, because obviously we had the ZR1 is
Oh
around the
man,
corner, and Chevy announced
1,064 horsepower.
right, and Chevy announced that they intend to take it to the Nürburgring as well.
Well, and we're not even done with the C8 platform because the Zora is coming out, which is the
Correct.
hybrid version on top of the 1,064 horsepower. So it's going to be
Well, at least rumored that it's supposed to be.
coming. So I think that's, you would think 10 years ago they kept saying this is peak car. And we kind of believed them because we thought, all these cool cars were going to get just, you know, neutered because of all the emissions regulations. But it seems like there's more and more horsepower coming out. And maybe we
Yeah.
have seen peak ICE, but there's still cool stuff coming out, like 1,000 horsepower factory Corvette or the Mustang GTD.
As the second from the top
Yeah.
performance model. I think we talked about this before. I think what it is this to me is the sign that maybe some manufacturers should shift their focus on creating just fun to drive cars, and that horsepower is not it. The other thing is like big horsepower cars are cool, but that's also like the majority of people buying these can't drive them like that.
No, and
Um,
uh, I don't know, because there's also the resurgence of especially the manual transmission on some of these hypercars, and especially the used ones from the early 2000s. The last of the analog supercars. You have your Mercies that are bring over double the money if the stick. The Ferrari 430s double with the stick. The 599s more than double with the stick. You have your Carrera GTs that are worth a fortune. And they're bringing huge money still
any
today.
Ferrari, some of the final models with gated manual
Mhm.
transmissions bring a huge
The
delta over their F1
the
counterparts.
Gallardo with a manual was on the bull market list for Haggerty because they're seeing so much demand for that. And
Mhm.
so that's interesting to see. I know a lot of those manual cars are not bought by the first owners. They're bought by the second owners. If that makes sense. That's where the demand's at.
Same
Is
thing with the Land
increased.
Cruiser. Most of the people that buy Land Cruisers new aren't the ones that are going to be off-roading them heavily and all that
Exactly.
type of
And
stuff.
so, with the performance of all these high performance EVs that are just spanking ICE cars in a straight line for the first at least 100 miles an hour, you have your Lucids,
Some
your
of them, the Demon
Teslas.
170
The Demon
showed that it
170
could
is a
beat
gnarly,
EVs at a quarter mile
yeah, in the right conditions on a
with
prep track with
slicks and
slicks and half the seats removed and that you could buy back for $1.
okay, so yeah, so maybe there's some like asterisks on
But
those
like
times.
all that said, you're right. I think some of these manufacturers are figuring out that maybe there is a market for fun to drive over just insane in a fast line or around a track.
Yeah. But I think it's still important to discuss the landscape because all this buildup, I think, makes us try to look at these cars differently. And maybe some of these things like track times are a little bit more significant now, right? As far as like what adds importance to the car. Because what's happened, and even if you talk to other people about this, the dual clutch transmission has made it now where our automatics are the fastest around tracks and even in drag racing, anything like that, et cetera, period. And so that's why all of these cars essentially have the same transmissions. And so now it almost comes down to what is the fastest car on a track, right?
Mhm.
And so the US in particular hasn't always been hyper competitive in this area. The Viper ACR was probably the most notable car because it might still actually have the record for this, for having the most like records for a single production car to hold for track records.
Yeah, which is funny. You think about the Nürburgring record they said. It wasn't by Dodge, it was by a group of ACR Viper enthusiasts who got together and found a driver and sent the car out.
That's the best way that any of that happens. And then if the manufacturer happens to like help them or support them by sending out engineers or whatever to fine tune the car, like that's the same thing Koenigsegg did for their top speed run. It
Mm.
was the owners club, the guys in California where there's like 7 or 8 cars that are
They
all
shut
owned by
down a
them.
stretch of
Yeah,
freeway.
they
Yeah.
they got the freeway shut down in Nevada. Koenigsegg then sent out their team and engineers to
Just to make
fine
sure no
tune and
one
dial
kills
the car.
themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if they
And
do, it's not them who did it.
yeah, and they
Yeah.
used one of their cars and set an insane speed. Like, and I think that was a speed too that
It
like
was
it was like
300 miles an hour, wasn't it?
278 77.8 or something like that.
They've done 300 though. Somebody, right? Didn't
So
Bugatti do
the
300?
Jesko, Bugatti did 300. That's the Chiron Super
Super
Sport
Sport.
300 Plus with the long tail and improved aerodynamics and all that type of stuff, and X-raying every tire
They
individually.
made all 3 of them, I'm sure, and
And they're very expensive, so like 5 million plus or something like
that's
that.
that's a lot of money.
Yeah, and they're probably. I think they went for more than that in particular, and even like the people that could afford them couldn't find them to buy them per se either. So they
Yeah.
were, even worth even more. But anyways, yeah. So the performance is getting insane, far beyond what anybody who's buying these cars can actually wheel and
Mhm.
drive these cars in anger, which could be good. The assists in these cars can probably outdo anything. Now, when they turn off the assists,
Well, good luck.
yeah, but it brings the question: do these performance characteristics become more critical? Do the lap times become more important? But then the other thing I wanted to bring up is that everybody always goes to the Nürburgring, and the Nürburgring is one specific track. Different tracks have different strong suits that suit some cars differently.
Mhm.
So the thing I wanted to bring up is I saw a lot of people referencing the Dodge Viper ACR in comparison to what we saw from the GTD and what we might see here with the ZR1 coming up, right? And the ACR was a really, really fast car, but it's going to be better on certain tracks than it will on other tracks. And then the reason I say that is the ACR had a slower top speed than the regular like
By a
GTS Viper
margin, yeah.
by a pretty significant margin. The ACR could only do about 168 miles per hour in a straight line because of all of the aero it had. Now, all of that aero it has means it's going to be extremely fast around the huge curved sections, which a lot of the Nürburgring is those curves. There are some pretty lengthy high speed sections, but there's also a lot of curves. So that car can go really, really fast. Certain narrow tracks that have a lot of turns, that car is going to be really, really fast around because the top speed's not going to be as critical.
Mhm.
Now, when you look at the ZR1 and the GTD, these are both cars that can go over 200 miles per hour. And so they're significantly more powerful and definitely faster in a straight line than that car. So something a bit more open, like let's say Circuit of the Americas, a high speed course, I bet you those cars would smoke an ACR all day.
Or something like, Le Mans,
Yeah, and
also on
so,
straight.
there's certain things that when you look at some of this stuff, you have to take it with a grain of salt and that everything's always relative. Obviously, Porsche does in GT3s are always fast around the Nürburgring because that's kind of how they're benchmarking their cars. So of course they're going to be fast there.
Mhm.
But if you go to some of these other tracks, like again, GTD and the ZR1 have way more horsepower than the GT3 and even a 911 Turbo S.
Mhm.
So a lot of it's relative, and people need to understand that. It's harder to convey to people, right? Because you're going to have some of the marketing jargon that's going to be like, "Oh, hey, look how fast this car was around the Nürburgring. It beat this car, or it beat this car," and you're like,
Which
"Yeah,
I
okay."
appreciate that, but I also appreciate these brands that also have a separate model that's for the fun to drive, for the enthusiast who
Hmm.
doesn't care about lap times, but just wants something that's good to drive in 99% of situations. Like,
Yeah,
for example, and Porsche figured this out pretty quick. And I know we've talked about manual transmissions before, but
the T.
well, not only the T, but they originally said, "Hey, we're going to stop making manual transmissions. This is the last one we're going to make." What was that called? The 911.
The ST.
No, that's the recent one. It was before that. They went for huge money
Oh,
during
the
COVID.
R.
The R. 911R. And they went for stupid money, 4 times, 3 times what they sold for. And Porsche's like, oh, crud. There's money to be had here. People like driving.
And Porsche was definitely upset at the people making tons of money flipping those
Because
cars.
Porsche wasn't making that money. And so Porsche's come out with lots of fun to drive models like the T, but more specifically the ST.
I forget what they came. There was something they came out with after the R that was the hey,
GT3
if you're
Touring,
gonna
maybe? Because I know that kind of
yeah,
essentially.
they came out with something to try and basically
I know
devalue the aftermarket
and it
value
worked.
for those cars.
It worked, but they had the GT3 Touring, which is the GT3 without all the crazy wings and aero, and those sold pretty good. And then they sharpened that and made the ST, which is one of the most, from all the reviews I've seen, it's one of the best 911s ever made. Is it the fastest around the track? No, it doesn't have the aero for that.
It's got the retro touches too, which is always good.
It has the retro touches too. That was a houndstooth interior, and then
Which
the
is
new
similar to the
T
Sport
has a
Classic.
plaid interior, which is kind of fun.
But it's also some of the exterior styling elements are reminiscent of some of the older Porsches too. It has certain trim pieces. And
good luck
stuff like
finding
that.
an ST. Like nobody's going to be able to buy one because they made them in such limited numbers and they sold out.
I know they were expensive from the get go. I think they were either just shy around $500,000, if memory serves me
with some
correct.
options for sure.
And they're definitely selling for more than that.
Yeah, and
Private party.
So I think it's interesting that I love that Porsche does both. If you want to set a lap time, here's a RS or a GT2. If you want to have fun, here's your, Cayman GT4 or your 911 ST or just a T if you're on a
Yeah, but
budget.
even those cars are almost too fast in most environments, right? You're basically always betting that you could go to jail in a lot of those
they are
cars.
geared long, but I think that's more for emissions. But with the
But I
right
mean,
gear
even a
setting,
Boxster is $105,000.
not starting, right?
No, they were. The last I saw, a Boxster was 105.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yes, and so at that point, it becomes Indy Miata all day.
Yeah, and Miata, I mean, you have your BRZ 86s. There's lots of fun, front-wheel drive cars that you can buy. GTI, they got rid of the manual. Shame on them. But you can buy the GLI still with the stick. Mini also got rid of the manual. Shame on them, especially. But that's a relatively peppy little car, et cetera, et cetera.
The dual clutch.
Yeah, does the Mini have the dual clutch now?
Yeah,
okay.
new one does.
I know the GTI is famous for that. The DSG.
The GSG's slightly different, right?
It's a dual clutch.
I thought there was a dual clutch, and then there's the DSG.
DSG is a dual clutch.
I don't know. I'm not really a Volkswagen guy.
Doppel, like a Schling. I can't pronounce it, but it's dual clutch. But yeah, that's why they're fast. For what they are, they're faster than manuals.
I thought that the DSG was almost similar to the BMW transmission.
They don't use a dual clutch, do they? I thought that was a single.
The
clutch.
new ones do for sure.
Oh yeah. Those are also kind of fun cars.
I have to look this up.
If you have more of a budget than a Miata, but less than a Porsche, you have your M2,
But you buy a Mark
M3,
7,
M4.
7.5 if you need a new one.
Yeah, I know that was the ultimate front wheel drive. Oh, of course, I forgot about the G-Rolla, the Civic Type R, the Golf R. Still, you can get. And so, there's lots of fun cars that necessarily aren't going to set track records.
Not really below 30K though. If they just barely, I think the only one that's below 30, because I think technically the Miata ND for 24 and up, last I saw pricing wise, I think it's 30,000 something is starting.
Yeah.
And then I think the GR86 and BRZ come in just under 28 and 28.9 or something like that.
Yeah, the
maybe.
WRX is over now.
Yeah.
So you're buying used. Most car guys do anyway.
For less than 30.
And so, the Mark 7.5 is probably your best bet if you want something that kind of does everything well. Mustang GTs are good values. Challengers to a degree. Camaros. The last iteration of the Camaro.
Finding a manual of some of those in good condition is hard for some of the muscle cars. A lot of those kind of get beat for manuals.
That's why it drives the price down for everybody.
If you want to run races, you go buy a Mustang GT 10-speed.
Yeah,
and you can even beat more powerful cars.
Yeah. As we saw with Cletus McFarlane, they bought a Mustang GT salvage car for 6 weeks.
No joke.
The 10-speed, and they put a tune on it. They put a really ugly turbo kit on it, and they were running 9s, which is just silly. And then they blew the motor. So they're getting a new motor put in, and they're going to do 6 summer. Anywho, going back to the high performance stuff. I'm interested. It's interesting to see what the Tesla Plaids, the Lucid Sapphires, all those really fast EVs, because all of them are fast. Mm-hmm. All the ones we're talking about are fast. So it's interesting to see that it's almost made the ICE cars even more focused.
Yeah. Ultimately, I prefer the sound feedback of a combustion car.
100%.
And at the end of the day, if we're talking enthusiast cars and performance, you want whatever you feel like is going to be most fun. And not all of us are trying to set lap times at Nürburgring every single weekend. And so we don't necessarily always need the fastest car ever, but we want something that we'll enjoy even on a back road, right? If you're taking it up to some town for the weekend, or you're doing Tail of the Dragon, or even out here in Tortillo Flats, whatever the case is, then I get wanting to, it makes sense. You'd prefer a combustion car because the EV probably just might not scratch that itch. If you were just going to win races, then yes, the EVs make more sense.
Some of the EV manufacturers are figuring out that, the enthusiasts do want that feedback. They do want the noises and the feeling, and because otherwise you feel like you're driving an appliance, a computer. And so it's interesting to see. One of the cool examples is the new Ioniq 5N. The fact that they have a motor in there to shove you like a transmission does.
Drivetrain lash, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. I'm interested to see where the EVs go to compete with the ICE for the heart of the enthusiast. Because otherwise, they're all fast. They all drive the same. How do you differentiate yourself?
Yeah, which is why I think people, kind of going back to my point earlier, that's why I think to some people these track times might have heavier meaning now than maybe they used to, right? We back in the day, I feel like if you go like circa mid 2000s, 2010s, when we were looking at Nürburgring times, it was like, wow, that's a really, really fast car, like period. It set a really, really fast time around the track.
9 minutes or 8
yeah, and like
minutes.
the 918 Spider,
good,
918 Spider had like a super fast time, and it's like, wow, like look how fast these cars
Mercedes
are.
would come in and smack Porsche. Porsche would come back and smack Mercedes.
Yeah, but I don't think that necessarily determined the sole buying force for the majority of consumers, right? It was just kind of one of those things you casually paid attention to. I think a lot of people don't care about track times, but maybe that's different now with how focused these cars are.
The EVs, they're gunning for 0 to 60 times. There's no beating that.
Especially with Formula One growing in popularity, there's almost like motorsports is kind of seeing a huge resurgence of there's probably even people that weren't necessarily huge car people, but will watch lots of Formula One. Obviously, Drive to Survive had a lot of that.
Especially in America.
For growing it here in the States. But, a lot of that might help with people recognizing the significance of some of these events, and those are also people with money, right, who can attend Formula One races and likely buying some of these more expensive supercars and hypercars that are setting these insanely fast times. For the rest of us, like the Corvette's the most expensive it's ever been, but I think it still has the highest value proposition it's ever had. Yeah, you're not getting anything faster for ZR1 money.
Insert Corvette, any of them, and it's followed by performance bargain.
Yep.
C5 Z06 performance bargain,
Yep, absolutely.
Any of the C6s performance bargain, and so on. New ZR1 performance bargain, realistically, as long as Chevy dealerships can behave themselves with the markups.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the ZR1 pricing that was announced was 175, right? So the Zora must be 200, right? Easy. Like it's gonna be 200, 210, something like that, which is crazy. But then a lot of the
most
foreign
Corvette ever made. Because they said the E-Ray is the most complicated Corvette ever made.
I like the E-Ray, though. The E-Ray, I know a lot of traditional Corvette enthusiasts do not like the E-Ray. I think that's mostly because they don't understand it. I think
first all-wheel drive Corvette.
Yeah, and I think because they called it the E-Ray, a lot of people assume that it's a full EV Corvette, but that's not the case. It's absolutely a V8-centered Corvette that happens to have the addition of a hybrid system that makes it all-wheel drive and significantly faster because of that.
The packaging was impressive on how they fit the battery and
everything's in like the transmission tunnel. Yep. So where you would have a all-wheel drive system, right, with your additional transfer cases and drive shafts.
Driving the front.
So you have a single electric motor that is mounted on the front axle, and then all the batteries are in the center of the car. So the weight distribution is actually pretty good too, as far as the car goes. So much so that it's a tenth of a second faster to 60 than the Z06, which is a more powerful car. I think the
sounds better.
Right, can't go wrong with the flat plane crank V8 in that sucker. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with the LT2. That's a great motor, and then you still get, I think it's low sixes, power figure wise, I think is what it is. I think it's 626 horsepower.
But it was
or
the
something
fastest
like that.
accelerating Corvette until probably the ZR1.
Yeah.
Just bananas that, I remember back when the C6 Z06 came out and I was like, how does it get better than this? And then the ZR1 comes out and you're like, there's no way it's going to get better than this. And then the C7 ZR1 came out and you're like, holy crud, like this is becoming unbearably fast. And then the C8 comes out and you're like, $60,000 for a base model.
Sub 3 second 0 to 60.
Yeah. For what, 70 or 50, 59,995 originally, 60 grand.
I think these days it starts at 70.
Oh yeah, I mean, and they didn't sell a whole lot of base models, but like, you remember when that came out? You look at it and it looks like no other Corvette, and the performance figures, and still gets 30 miles per gallon if you behave yourself, and it'll hold 2 golf bags in the back, and
you can't behave yourself in the Corvette.
Yeah,
I just had one, at the beginning of this year.
On long highway trips, you can behave yourself on a Corvette, but I was able to. It was fun. 30 miles per gallon is what I averaged, and it was a 6-speed manual, but it had an aftermarket exhaust on it, and so it droned in 6th, and so that whole trip was done in 5th, 31 miles per gallon, which was bananas, because I behaved myself. Because the police presence was high on that stretch of freeway, and so I didn't want to.
You were motivated.
I was motivated to not be drive like a jerk. So, but yeah, the Corvette is really a cool example of where performance cars are at.
And we're putting the U.S. on the map. I think now that the GTD has cemented itself as with a sub 7 minute time, I think that puts it in like the top 15 fastest production cars around the ring.
Can you imagine telling your kid version of yourself that, yeah, there's going to be a freaking Mustang coming out that's going to just like wreck everybody's times, and it's going to have inboard suspension and all these other fun tricks, and it's going to, how much they're selling for big money though? That's what, 325, 350?
I want to say 325. It's either 315 or 325 is the starting price for the GTD. I'm not sure there's really a whole lot of options though,
other than any paint color you want.
Yeah.
They do have kind of a paint sample program.
Yeah, maybe if you get like the special editions, those might cost a little bit extra. Like they've already announced the Spirit of America edition, which has the red, white, and blue stripes.
Yeah, somebody's doing a Mistachrome, I think, version too. There's only going to be one. I saw a Mistachrome.
I know that RTR, Von Gitten's thing, which has obviously a big standing relationship with Ford, had announced that they would do like Mistachrome for their RTR cars, like the Spec 5s. Yeah.
We got to have Nick on to talk about paint sometime, because that would be a fascinating conversation to know all about
the coolest paint colors of all time. Get the details like the blue Lexus color.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
The butterfly one.
The butterfly one.
One model year.
Yep, very expensive and
took a ton of time to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's interesting that, you know, you wouldn't expect the Mustang to be kind of leading the way for performance for America. But here we are.
Boy, that car, I mean, it looks like a Mustang, but the amount of engineering effort that's gone into that thing.
Not a lot of Mustang underneath.
Yeah, 815 horsepower.
Does it still use the, what engine does it have? Is it still the 5.0?
Yeah, so it's a Predator-based motor, but it's been well beyond, like pushed well beyond what the GT500 had.
Okay, so it's a 5.2 then?
Yeah, okay. Supercharged 5.2. It's mid-mounted. Front mid-mounted so far back, but then you have the wide body package and all the cooling aero like that. If Porsche was to look at a Mustang and go, yeah, you know what, we'll take a crack at it, we'll build one for the road.
We're gonna build a GT3
that's
Mustang.
That's exactly what the GTD would look like, because all the vents are purpose built, they're all functional. You have all this spoiler. It has, I believe it has DRS, so it's not like active aero in that like the wing like comes up to brake, but more like the wing opens up to reduce drag, like a Formula One car is what's on that as well.
Cool. You know, and after all those years of Ford GTs, I did not expect the Mustang to be kind of the halo product for Ford.
There's a lot of stuff that's you know, on that car. A lot of the lessons I think learned from the Ford GT, or at least shared with the Ford GT. So obviously, like Multimatics involvement to build the semi-adaptive suspension, which can lower the car up to like 40 millimeters.
Just inboard mounted, and they put a window so you can see it, which is bananas.
Yes, and then it's also got like Akrapovic exhaust and stuff like that
from the factory.
Yeah, which is like titanium, you know, components, and there might even be Inconel in that car. Oh, and then the you've got the F22 Raptor components that were recycled and used on the interior of the Ford GTD.
Stop.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
No.
So there's recycled F22 Raptor fighter jet parts on the interior.
That's what, $1 billion aircraft. So that's probably why it costs. If they didn't do it, it'd be $150,000.
The U.S. military is like, we're retiring this after it's only, you know, killed some balloons or whatever. we're retiring these, and we need to make some of our money back. So we're gonna start selling F-22 parts.
Oh man, you know how like some of those aircraft had like the what they killed on the side. And see the F-22 in the balloon.
Yeah, I mean it's cool, you know.
That's a cool calling card, but yeah, I would still say that I'm probably more excited about the Zora than maybe even the Mustang. That's going to be.
I'm more excited for the ZR1. Here's the other thing we haven't talked about.
But the
so
ZR1
some of the
with all-wheel drive and a hybrid system, like I'm gonna go back to my childhood self. How does it get any better than that? I'm interested to see how Chevy can even top that.
Well, but I wanna bring this point up to you. So to make it sound like it's like a political country argument, our foreign adversary competitors to the U.S. supercar race cars have actually, most of them have gone hybrid, right? So the GTD and the ZR1 are not hybrids. And so in that sense, they're really unique. Not only are they some of the fastest things the U.S. has ever produced that could be a track-capable, ready monster since the ACR, but like they're beating out cars that are supposed to be hybrids and all-wheel drive, and these are rear-wheel drive cars
It
still.
feels like you're bringing like a battle axe to a gunfight
Yeah,
or to a
yeah.
laser fight. Yeah.
Or at least the US cars are cannons in this case that are overbuilt for whatever there is they're conquering. I think there's a couple advantages. I think some of the particle filters and stuff that have to be on the European cars now actually make it where the US versions of even European cars are actually more potent than their European counterparts
Yeah.
because they don't have the same hyper aggressive emissions.
Mhm.
So like you look at even something as old as the McLaren Senna, I say old, it's couple years, but the European ones had different exhausts
Hmm.
than the US cars because they had the difference in the
Which
particle filters. Ferraris, same thing. Ferraris are quieter overseas because they got those particle
which is funny
filters
because
on
that's
them.
exactly the opposite of, the
Or the
70s
way
and
things used to
80s.
be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to where you import them in the gray market and you have the faster version with prettier bumpers.
yeah, yep.
And now the
Faster and
Europeans
prettier.
have gone opposite. Though they are going to start implementing gasoline particulate filters in the US, which kind of breaks my heart.
Time to stop buying new cars.
Yeah, yeah.
I
So I
mean,
know Ford is starting to do that. Summer of this year, they're going to introduce it on the new Mavericks, and I think they're already starting to put them on the Bronco Sport and the Escapes with the 2 liters to try to bring down the emissions
and it's going to make them quieter too.
and less powerful and more expensive to repair. Because it works so good with the diesels, folks.
Engines are going to sound more and more just like a bunch of clatter,
Yeah, it's
injector
direct
noises,
injection.
and yes.
Though that engine, it's the third generation of the 2 liter EcoBoost, and they actually went with dual injection, which is cool. So that'll make it more reliable in that aspect. Dual injection meaning you have direct injection, and then, and Toyota's famous for this. You get a second set of injectors in the intake manifold to kind of wash the valves that occasionally turn on.
Hmm.
The beauty of doing something like that is when you go to make big horsepower, you replace those injectors with something that shoots in methanol.
You know who really paved the way for dual injectors?
Who?
Ram. The Hemi V8s.
God help us. 16 spark plugs.
Yeah,
For
oh yeah.
reasons.
Um,
Help out your local Napa store.
it's kind of funny. I remember replacing the spark plugs on my Ram. It was one of those things that was like it almost felt like a rite of passage, when you're buying 16 spark
16
plugs for a
spark
single
plugs.
motor that's
Yeah.
not a
You
V16.
could do 4 Hondas in the same amount of time. Probably easier too. The other thing that we should mention is we've talked about Chevy, we've talked about Ford. Where the heck is Stellantis in this? Now that they've
Not
killed,
building a new Viper.
they're not built a new Viper. They've completely castrated the Charger. They got rid of the Challenger. Like, where are they?
Oh
at?
yeah, that the highest performance version of the Charger wouldn't even stand a chance.
They did. They got rid of
It's
the
6,000
T-Rex.
pounds.
It's a freaking boat, and it's not even fast EV. And so I'm like, where are they at? I do have a little bit
Trying
of
to
faith
figure out who their
because
new
was it
CEO is.
Tim Kunis came back as the head of
Ram.
and he was the kind of the father of the Hellcat, according to a lot of people. And so I'm interested to see where they take. I mean, they even got rid of the freaking Hellcat powered Cherokee and the Hemi powered Cherokee. The current Cherokee is probably the most boring one they've ever made because it's the first one that never got a V8.
Should have had a V8.
Should have had a V8.
Well, you could argue that's the case for a lot of
But
cars.
they didn't design it for the freaking Hurricane straight six either. So it's just stuck with a Pentastar. Like, what were
Which
they thinking?
is just as inefficient as the outgoing V8s they were trying so hard to retire.
Well, yeah, the Pentastars aren't the most powerful or efficient things on Earth, or reliable.
Well, but I mean, the Hurricane
The
isn't
Hurricane,
any
yeah,
more efficient than the V8s that they
no,
so desperately said it had to
but it's
replace.
2 cylinders less, and so it's less emissions and whatever. So don't sue a CPA.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the EPA's stance on some of that stuff is.
So I mean, you have people like Porsche who's still making these cool cars. You have Chevy who's just killing it with the new Corvette, and you have not Dodge, Ford.
Ford and GM are doing cool stuff.
Toyota's still doing the everyman kind of.
Toyota's doing
which
cool
is
stuff.
cool.
Well, Akio Toyota, right, made that statement a couple years ago
I
now
don't want
that
any boring Toyotas.
yeah, and he wasn't going to stop until it was regarded as an
lineup
enthusiast brand and as a
and
whole.
then they freaking voted him out, which is just such a bummer. 'Cause I don't know. Though I do have a bit of a rant about new Toyota trucks, but we can save that for a different episode. How they don't make the perfect Toyota truck or SUV right now. Think about it. What I want in life. All I want for Toyota to do is give me a new Land Cruiser with the drivetrain from the GX, twin turbo V6, with a freaking
You
third
probably
row
want the
seat and
engine.
all 3 lockers
You
from
probably
the
want the.
LX.
Oh, I guess you said drivetrain, so you mean engine and trans.
Yes.
It's the same trans, though, right? No, 10-speed. I think in the GX, 8-speed in the Land Cruiser.
I don't remember.
Or is it 8-speed in both?
But I don't like
And
the
then
turbo
four-cylinder
four-cylinder
V6.
and especially the hybrid. And I want the third row of seats, even though it's useless, and the styling of the Land Cruiser with the triple lockers from the new LX hybrid with
Yeah, the GX is just a better, beefier vehicle all around.
or sorry, the LX.
Oh, you want the even beefier suspension? Actually,
No, no,
so
no, no.
the
So they're all
GX
very
is
similar.
beefier.
So
Well, no, they're all kind
so they
of
came out with the new LX
steps.
700H, which is the new hybrid version of the LX, and it's the first Toyota since the 90s to get triple locker, front, rear, and middle. No one's going to use on the LX because the front approach angle is 2, and it looks like it can eat children. It's the ugliest thing I've ever seen, but they won't give any other vehicle freaking triple lockers.
Yeah, I guess you only get front and rear lockers for the GX550 and the Land Cruiser, and that's
Uh,
only.
Rear locker. I don't think they do front lockers.
I thought they had front lockers. I'll have to go watch my reviews again.
Yeah,
But
no,
I'm pretty
they might
sure they
have a
had front and rear
center locker,
lockers.
but they don't have a front. I don't think Toyota sold a front locker since the
Because the
1990s.
TRD Pros were rear locker only.
That's correct, as are all the TRD off-roads and pretty much every other. The most you've gotten is occasionally you could get a center locker and a rear locker, but they haven't offered the front locker, all 3, since the 90s.
You know what it has?
A lot of
G-Wagon.
people. G-Wagon. You could get not a triple locker, but you get front and rear lockers in the off-road GM products, the ZR2 Colorado,
Yeah,
Bisons.
I was gonna say I had the 2500 GMC
You could that would only had a rear
AEV
locker.
edition. Is that a
Which,
rear only?
if money was no object, I would definitely have one of those.
They're awesome.
That and a Raptor R.
Raptor R.
The Trimmer F-150 got a front limited slip if you optioned it right, and that had a rear locker. But yeah, it's kind of hard to find. All the Rubicon Jeeps, of course, had front lockers.
Yeah, I think the Wrangler Rubicon just had front and rear lockers.
Yeah, sway bar disconnects. Anywho,
I could have sworn it was the off-road package, and then you got the lockers plus the sway bar disconnect.
On which one?
The Land Cruiser and GX550.
So the off-road packages did get you a sway bar disconnect and a rear locker.
Rear locker.
But they didn't
Really,
come
that was
standard
it?
with lockers either.
That's the part I was going to bring up, because so the Land Cruiser, the base model, you had like basically the base model and the off-road models had the Land Cruisers sold.
1958s.
Well, the 1958 is like a first edition. Or no, sorry, we're
That's
talking.
the base model.
Sorry, the first edition is a fully loaded
Yes.
1958, which is the only way that you can get that body style, but with all the upgrades. Because otherwise, the 1958, the base model only offered in a few colors.
So it's the 1958 the Land Cruiser trim, and then the first edition. The first edition was loaded version of
the 1958 body style
Land Cruiser, but it got the 1958 headlights.
Right.
Yes.
But because if you get the upgraded version, you get the blocky headlights, which I think look fine, personally.
I like the circle headlights.
I prefer the circle headlights, but I don't see any problem with the
No.
blocky ones on the Land Cruiser.
But I would
But the
retrofit if I could.
GX550 is unique in that it has the luxury trim, or for essentially the same price, you get the Overtrail trim, which is the off-road trim, and
But
that
you
one
get
comes
rid of
with
the third row
lockers.
seat, which pisses me off.
Well, you know what pisses me off about the
they also
GX550
have,
though is the luxury trim is like the opposite of everything you want from that vehicle. It gives you big wheels that harshen the ride, and then you still don't get any of the off-road tech in that one.
Well, and with the GX, you also got EKDSS, which is it's more than a sway bar disconnect. It's an active sway bar. So like when you're on the street and it knows that, it tenses up the ride and it allows it to handle real nice with minimal body roll. And then when it knows it's off road, it essentially disconnects it and you have all of this.
Maybe we should do an off-road episode. Bring on our buddy, the other Jacob, as well, because this makes for a really interesting conversation with a lot of the tech that's been available and talking about
swayed so far off of performance cars.
Even the benefits though of a compromised versus uncompromised road vehicle and how that can translate to off-road. Because I think it's a really interesting conversation, right? Especially here in the U.S., where we tend to be known for buying vehicles, let's say, that we don't necessarily need, but we think we might need to use for some particular circumstance far in the future.
Well, that's anything Americans buy. That's why the F-150 is one of the biggest selling cars in America. Even a RAV4. How many people need a freaking all-wheel drive and a giant SUV for driving one person, maybe two people to and from work? Like, nobody. But just in case they need to go camping, you need the crossover just with all-wheel drive, and snow is scary just in case. Even though if you live in the desert, you might go to Flagstaff and need the snow. And then
God forbid
F-150s,
that
yeah,
fire road you drive from once a year got a
exactly.
few more rocks in the way.
And honestly, like F-150s, like you buy it if you need to tow 10,000 pounds once, not because you regularly tow 10. Most truck owners can get away with a Maverick hybrid.
So we're doing an off-road episode.
Yes,
So
we
there's
are.
a lot to talk about, I think.
Maybe
Speed
next
bumps galore.
week.
Yeah.
So, but back to performance cars. I think it's cool that Toyota and Subaru, to a degree, are holding the bottom of the performance market. Ford also offers, the EcoBoost Mustang, which is quite impressive in its own rights, and the Mustang GT.
Oh, I mean, they make a ton of power, over 300 horsepower from those.
Yeah,
That's a seriously
shame
fast
they got rid of
vehicle.
the EcoBoost manual. Though. That's a bummer because it was kind of a cool tuner car that you could put a bigger turbo on.
Unfortunately, Ford only sells the faster ones now.
Quit it. I'm a manual elitist jerk.
I mean, I only own manuals. I get it. But
Honda's been
sometimes
really
you
good
want to
about fun vehicles for the price. Mazda has a pretty good lineup. Who else makes good performance? Mercedes is disappointing because of the C-Class AMG.
win. And the 60 E63 is now 4-cylinder.
They did the E63. I thought that was the C63.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. C63.
4-cylinder hybrid. It's the fastest one they've ever made.
I know.
It's also the heaviest and the least best sounding.
And probably the least desirable from a customer standpoint.
Well, yeah, they're already offering cash in the hood of those for lease deals. On the brand new model. That's bad. They knew they messed up when they're offering cash deals on new vehicles.
It's literally the first model year.
Same thing with the new Chargers, which I still can't get over the name Charger for an electric vehicle. Because when you type in electric charger on Google, first thing's going to pop up as an Apple charger. They should have called it the Challenger or something else. The Aspen, I don't know, something.
Yeah, but it was kind of a return to form, right? Because we talked to Ralph Gilles. He'll tell you that the whole inspiration for that is 68 Charger and ethos, rear pillars and all.
They should have called it the Cornet. It doesn't have that much brand cash. You could get it in a
Ford. Or come up with some new name that is somehow reminiscent of the old 60s muscle car days, but then try to throw an EV or electric something into it.
Oh, Dodge, if you hear
That's
this,
a good one.
Which you won't, but if you hear this...
We have some new names.
We will be badassadors for a week, so we can get the credit for the Polera.
But we also need a Hellcat Durango.
Yes.
To do that.
Yeah, hook us up.
And tires covered.
Yes. And then we need enough money for that idea to buy our Nissan Murano Cross Cabriolet.
So we can take it to Car Week.
That is what this podcast is for, is to make enough money.
Fund a
Murano Cross Cabriolet.
Yeah, if you're interested in donating to the fund, watch the videos a bunch on repeat, send some money to our GoFundMe, which we don't even have set up because we're not that serious about it.
Just reach out to Jalopy Jeff on Instagram.
And tell us you want to support the Nissan Murano Cross Cabriolet.
Yes, the ultimate automobile.
Okay, so yeah, there you have it. That's kind of our quick look. It's
Don't you love going from ZR1 Corvette to Murano Cross Cabriolet?
Yeah, we were a bit all over the place, but the base discussion at the end of the day was kind of, how have these supercars, what is happening in the landscape?
0 to 60 times to track times, because that is the way they can differentiate from.
Yeah,
EVs.
And I think that's kind of become more critical in a day and age where everything is so immensely powerful and immensely fast, and now the U.S. is in here swinging to try and be the heavy hitters in this tracked environment.
Final question. Do you think that we are at peak ICE, or do you think there's still more to come?
Oh, there's absolutely more to come. Because if you think about it, all these mandates, because these auto manufacturers have to look so far in advance for what their roadmap is, they stopped developing combustion engines a long time ago, which is why most of what these newer combustion vehicles, with the exception of a few different models, are mostly just kind of developments or incremental improvements upon existing platforms, because it didn't make sense to put the money into a full new combustion platform. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's why, they've stifled the improvement of combustion engines. And so we're kind of looking at the peak because nobody's invested any additional money to continue to improve it.
Sure.
The Corvette, I think, is kind of one of those few examples of, everything we see from the new LT motors that come out for the new C8 are kind of new and specific to those models, like the integrated turbos of the ZR1, which is unfortunate, but that was kind of forced by the government. And the people are deciding via their cash that that's not what they're interested in. And a lot of those mandates, fortunately, have since been backed down quite a bit.
Only Mercedes would figure that out and give us back our V8 AMG cars.
Yeah.
Preferably brown with a wagon. Okay. Well,
All right.
this has been our episode. Best one yet.
Yeah. Yeah. All over the place, rambling as well. We hope you guys enjoyed it. If you could go ahead and hit that like button or a thumbs up, would really appreciate it, or rate the podcast if you're listening and or watching it over on YouTube. We really appreciate you for checking it out. Don't forget to get subscribed so you don't miss out on future content like this. One of the things we like to do is cycle people in and out of the podcast as we feature different people, guests, etc. So that's kind of the plan for future episodes. But with that, thank you so much for watching or listening, and we will see you guys in the next one.